I'm going to say something today that might make some people uncomfortable, and I'm not going to apologize for it. Because the truth has never been comfortable. The truth has always been a fire that burns away what is false and leaves only what is real. And what is real right now, what I see when I look at the world around me, is that men have forgotten what it means to be men. Not all men, but too many. Far too many. And the damage it is causing to families, to communities, to children, to women, to the men themselves, is something that keeps me awake at night. Because I remember what men used to be. I grew up surrounded by men who carried themselves in a way that made you feel safe just being near them. Not because they were big, not because they were loud, not because they walked around pounding their chests and telling everyone how tough they were. They were safe because they were solid. They were grounded. They were like old trees with roots so deep that no storm could move them. And when you stood next to a man like that, you felt the earth steady beneath your feet. That is what a man is supposed to be. An anchor, a root, a place where the people around him can find their footing when the ground starts to shake. My grandfather was that kind of man. He stood about 5'9". He wasn't a big man by any measurement. But when he walked into a room, the room changed. Not because he demanded attention, because he didn't need it. He had a stillness about him that drew people in the way a fire draws people in on a cold night. You wanted to be near him. You wanted to hear what he had to say. Not because he spoke often. He didn't. He was one of the quietest men I have ever known. But when he did speak, every word landed like a stone dropped into still water. You felt the ripples. You remembered what he said. And the reason his words carried that weight is because they were backed by his life. He didn't say things he didn't mean. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. He didn't talk about honor. He lived it. He didn't talk about sacrifice. He made it. Every single day. Without announcement. Without expectation of praise. He just did what needed to be done. And he did it quietly. And he expected nothing in return. That was his definition of being a man. You do what needs to be done. You protect what needs to be protected. You carry what needs to be carried. And you don't complain about the weight. Now I look around and I see something very different. I see men who don't know how to be still. Men who are always performing. Always posturing. Always trying to prove something to someone. I see men who confuse loudness with strength, who confuse aggression with courage, who confuse domination with leadership. I see men who think being a man means never showing emotion, never admitting they're wrong, never asking for help, never bending. And I want to tell you something. That is not strength. That is fear wearing a mask. A man who cannot show emotion is not strong. He is terrified. Terrified that if people see what's really inside him, they will think less of him. A man who cannot admit he's wrong is not confident. He is fragile. So fragile that a single crack in his image could shatter him completely. A man who cannot ask for help is not independent. He is alone. And there is nothing powerful about being alone when you didn't choose it. When you pushed everyone away because you were too proud to let them see you struggle. My grandfather cried. I want you to hear that. This man, this quiet, solid, unshakable man who could calm a room just by walking into it. This man cried. I saw him cry when his brother passed. I saw him cry when the first snow came one year and he stood outside and watched it fall like he was seeing something the rest of us couldn't see. I saw him cry when my grandmother sang an old song at a gathering, and her voice cracked on the high note and she laughed at herself and kept going. He cried because he felt things deeply. And feeling things deeply is not a weakness. It is the very definition of being alive. A man who cannot feel is not a man. He is a wall. And walls don't build families. Walls don't raise children. Walls don't hold a woman in the middle of the night when she's afraid. Walls just stand there keeping everything out, including the things that could have saved them. Let me tell you what happened. Let me tell you where I think men lost their way. It didn't happen overnight. It happened slowly over generations, like a river being diverted from its natural course, one stone at a time, until one day it's flowing in a direction it was never meant to flow. The first thing that happened is that men were separated from their fathers. Not always physically, though that happened too, but spiritually, emotionally. The connection between a father and a son, which in our tradition is one of the most sacred bonds on earth, was broken. Fathers stopped teaching their sons what it means to be a man, not because they didn't want to, because they didn't know, because their fathers hadn't taught them either, and their fathers before them. Generation after generation of men who were never shown what healthy masculinity looks like, who were never told that being a man means being gentle and strong at the same time, that being a man means knowing when to fight and when to walk away, that being a man means providing not just money and shelter, but presence, attention, time, emotion, the things that a child needs even more than food. In our tradition, a boy didn't become a man by accident. It was intentional. It was guided. The older men in the community would take the boys aside at a certain age and begin teaching them. Not just skills, not just how to hunt or fish or build. They taught them how to think, how to carry responsibility, how to treat women, how to handle anger, how to sit with pain without letting it turn into destruction, how to make decisions that serve not just yourself, but the people who depend on you. This was not optional. This was the most important work the older men did, because they understood something that the modern world has completely lost. A boy does not automatically become a man just because he gets older. A boy becomes a man when other men show him the way. Without that guidance, without that initiation, the boy stays a boy. He might grow a beard. He might get a job. He might have children of his own. But inside, where it matters, he is still a boy, still reacting instead of responding, still seeking approval instead of standing on his own, still running from pain instead of learning from it. And that is what I see everywhere I look. Grown men who are still boys inside. Not because there was something wrong with them, because nobody ever finished raising them. I want to talk about anger for a moment. Because anger is the emotion that has been most misused by men in the modern world. Anger is not a bad emotion. In our tradition, anger is sacred. Anger is the fire that tells you something is wrong. Something is unjust. Something needs to change. Anger is the energy that drives a man to protect his family, to stand up against what is harmful, to say no to what is evil. Anger, properly channeled, builds nations. It creates movements. It changes the world. But anger without direction, anger without discipline, anger without wisdom, that is destruction. And too many men have been handed their anger without being taught what to do with it. They carry it around like a loaded weapon with no safety and no training. And it goes off at the wrong times, at the wrong people, at the woman who loves them, at the child who looks up to them, at the stranger who accidentally crossed their path on a bad day, at themselves, in the quiet hours when nobody is watching. That is not masculinity. That is a wound bleeding onto everyone nearby. And it will keep bleeding until the man has the courage to look at where it came from and do the hard work of healing it. My grandfather told me something about anger when I was 14. I had gotten into a fight with another boy over something stupid. I don't even remember what it was about. And I came home with blood on my shirt and fire in my eyes, expecting my grandfather to be proud of me for standing my ground. Instead, he sat me down and looked at me for a long time without saying anything. And then he said, "Did you win?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "What did you win?" And I opened my mouth to answer and nothing came out, because I hadn't won anything. The other boy was hurt. I was hurt. Nothing had been resolved. Nothing had been gained. And my grandfather said, "A man who fights without purpose is just a storm without rain." a lot of noise, a lot of damage, but nothing grows after it passes. A real man is the rain. He brings what is needed. He feeds what is growing. He doesn't destroy the field just to prove he can. I have thought about that every single day of my life since then. Every time I feel anger rising in my chest, I hear his voice. Are you the storm or the rain? Are you destroying or are you feeding? That one question has saved me from more mistakes than I can count. Now, let me talk about women, because you cannot have a conversation about what men have become without talking about how men treat women. And what I see makes me deeply sad. I see men who treat women as objects, as trophies, as things to be conquered and collected and discarded. I see men who measure their worth by how many women they can attract, rather than by how well they treat the one they are with. I see men who have no idea how to love a woman, not desire her, not possess her, love her. And there is a canyon between those things that most men never learn to cross. In our tradition, women are sacred. I don't mean that in a poetic way. I mean it, literally. Women carry the power of creation inside their bodies. They bring life into the world. They hold the community together. They are the center around which everything else revolves. And a man's relationship to women is the clearest mirror of who he really is. Show me how a man treats his mother and I will tell you who he is. Show me how a man speaks to his wife when they are alone, and I will tell you everything about his character. Show me how a man responds when a woman tells him he has hurt her, and I will tell you whether he is a man or still a boy pretending. A real man does not need to control a woman. A real man does not need a woman to be small so that he can feel big. A real man stands beside a woman and is grateful for her strength. He is not threatened by her intelligence. He is not diminished by her success. He does not need her to be less so that he can be more. My grandfather treated my grandmother like she was the sun, not with worship, not with submission, with respect so deep it was woven into every word he said and every action he took. He never raised his voice to her, not once. He never made a decision without asking her opinion, not because she demanded it, because he valued it, because he understood that her perspective was different from his, and the different did not mean lesser. It meant essential. A man who only listens to other men is a man who is only seeing half the world, and you cannot navigate the world with half of you. I want to talk about something else that I think has contributed to the collapse of real manhood, and that is comfort. The modern world has made everything easy, and ease is the enemy of character. Think about the men who came before us. My grandfather's generation, his father's generation. These were men who woke up before the sun and worked until after the sun went down, not because they wanted to, because people depended on them. Their families would not eat if they did not work. Their homes would not stand if they did not build. Their communities would not survive if they did not contribute. There was no option to be lazy. There was no option to sit around and complain about how hard life was. Life was hard. Everyone knew it was hard. And you either rose to meet it, or people suffered because of your weakness. That pressure, that daily requirement to be more than what you feel like being, that is what forged real men. Not comfort, not convenience, not a world where everything you want is delivered to your door without you having to stand up from the couch. Struggle builds men, and we have built a world with very little struggle. So where are the men supposed to come from? I'm not saying we should go back to a time of suffering. I'm not saying hardship for its own sake is a good thing. What I'm saying is that a man needs something to push against. A man needs resistance the way a muscle needs weight. Without resistance, the muscle weakens. It atrophies. It forgets what it was built to do. And that is what has happened to an entire generation of men. They have had nothing real to push against. No mountains to climb. No rivers to cross. No families depending on them in a way that demands everything they have. And without that demand, they have collapsed inward. They have filled the emptiness with distractions, with screens, with substances, with shallow pleasures that feel good for a moment and leave nothing behind. And the tragedy is that most of them don't even realize what's happened. They think they're fine. They think this is what life is. Waking up, going through the motions, numbing the boredom, going to sleep, repeating. But something inside them knows better. Something inside them is restless. Something inside them is hungry for a challenge that matters, for a purpose that demands their full strength, for a life that asks them to be more than what they currently are. That restlessness is not a problem. It is the voice of the man they were meant to become, calling out from inside them, saying, "Wake up. There is more to you than this." There is another thing I want to address, and it's the way men relate to each other now, or rather the way they don't. In our tradition, men had deep bonds with other men, not just friendships, brotherhoods, sacred relationships built on trust and honesty and mutual accountability. Men sat with other men and talked about real things, about their fears, about their struggles, about their failures and what they learned from them. They challenged each other. They called each other out when one of them was heading in the wrong direction. They held each other up when one of them was falling. And there was no shame in any of it. There was no stigma in a man turning to another man and saying, "I need help. I'm lost. I don't know what to do." That was not weakness. That was wisdom. Because a man who thinks he can navigate this life alone is a fool. And a man who is too proud to ask for help will drown in water that is only waist deep. Today, men don't have those bonds. They have acquaintances. They have drinking buddies. They have colleagues. But they don't have brothers. They don't have men in their lives who will look them in the eye and say, "What you're doing is wrong, and I love you too much to let you keep doing it." And without that accountability, without that brotherhood, men drift. They make the same mistakes over and over. They hurt the same people over and over. They carry the same pain year after year because they have no one to help them set it down. If you are a man listening to this, I want you to think about something. When was the last time you had a real conversation with another man? Not about sports, not about work, not about surface-level things that keep the conversation safe and comfortable. When was the last time you sat with another man and told him the truth about your life? The real truth. The parts you hide from everyone. The doubts. The fears. The moments you feel like you're failing at everything. If you can't remember the last time that happened, that tells you something. It tells you that you are carrying a weight that was never meant to be carried alone. And the first step to becoming the man you were supposed to be is putting that weight down in front of someone you trust and letting them help you carry it. I also want to talk about fathers, because this is where the healing has to start. If you are a man over 30 and you have children, you have the most important job on this earth, more important than your career, more important than your bank account, more important than anything else you will ever do. You are shaping human beings. You are building the next generation of men and women. And what you show them, not what you tell them, what you show them, that is what they will become. If you show your son that a man handles frustration by yelling, he will yell. If you show your son that a man handles sadness by disappearing, he will disappear. If you show your son that a man handles conflict by dominating, he will dominate. But if you show your son that a man handles frustration by taking a breath and choosing his words carefully, he will learn patience. If you show your son that a man can sit with sadness and let it move through him without it breaking him, he will learn resilience. If you show your son that a man handles conflict by listening first and speaking second, he will learn wisdom. You are the textbook. You are the lesson plan. Your life is the curriculum. And your children are studying you every single minute of every single day, whether you realize it or not. And if you are a man who did not have a father, or whose father was absent, or whose father was harmful, I want to speak directly to you. You are not broken. You are not doomed to repeat what was done to you. The fact that you didn't have a guide does not mean you cannot become one. It means you have to work harder. It means you have to seek out the wisdom that wasn't given to you. From elders, from books, from other men who have walked the path before you. From the quiet voice inside you that already knows what a good man looks like, even if you never saw one in your own home. That voice is there. It has always been there. It is the voice of every ancestor who came before you, who knew what it meant to carry themselves with dignity. Their blood is in your veins. Their strength is in your bones. You just have to choose to access it. You have to choose every single day to be the man you needed when you were a boy. That choice is not easy, but it is the most powerful choice a man can make. I knew a man named Henry who grew up without a father. His father left before Henry could walk, and Henry spent his whole childhood angry about that. Angry at a ghost. Angry at an empty chair at the dinner table. Angry at every other boy who had a dad showing up to their games, and their ceremonies, and their graduations. That anger followed Henry into adulthood like a shadow. It poisoned his relationships. It made him hard in places where he needed to be soft. It made him push away the very people who were trying to love him because somewhere deep inside, he believed that if his own father could leave, then everyone would leave eventually. And then Henry had a son. And the moment he held that boy in his arms, something cracked open inside him. Not the anger. Something underneath the anger. Something older and deeper. And Henry looked at that baby and he made a decision that changed the course of his entire family's history. He said, "It stops with me. Whatever my father couldn't give me, I will give to you." And he did. Henry became the most present, the most attentive, the most loving father I have ever seen. Not because it was natural, because he chose it. Every single day he chose it. Against every instinct that told him to run. Against every fear that told him he would fail. He chose to stay. And his son grew up knowing what a good man looks like. And his son will teach his son. And the chain that was broken has been repaired. One man. One decision. That is all it takes. I want to end with something my grandfather said on the last evening I spent with him before he passed. We were sitting outside. The sky was orange and purple and the air smelled like sage and wood smoke. And he looked at me and he said, "The world doesn't need more tough men. The world has enough tough men. The world needs more good men. Men who are tough when they need to be and gentle when they need to be. Men who know the between the two and can move between them like water moves between the rocks. Be water. Don't be the rock. The rock sits in one place and thinks it's strong because nothing moves it. But the water goes everywhere. The water feeds everything. The water shapes the land itself over time. Be the man who feeds. Be the man who shapes. Be the man whose presence makes the people around him grow. That is what it means to be a man. Not the loudest voice in the room. Not the biggest body. Not the most feared. The most needed. The most trusted. The most steady. Be steady. The world is shaking, and it needs men who don't shake with it. It needs men who plant their feet and open their arms and say, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever comes, I'm here." That is a man, and the world is starving for them.